Bert! Get him! Yeah! Ron Babe was right.
I'm feeling spry. Hey everybody, sorry it's been a little while. I was busy. I was down in Florida competing in my second jiu-jitsu tournament. And, well, it's one of them things. Let me say this much about it. At my age, at 67 years old, first of all, there's not a lot of guys in their 60s, and it's called Master 7, that even want to do this idiotic stunt. I got thrown pretty goddamn hard by a new friend, Don. Don, if you're listening to the podcast now, because we talked, hats off to you for throwing the frick out of me down to my shoulder. Damn near a judo throw. But anyway, I got back up. I took him down, tried to put him in an omoplata. I know only 3 of you out there know what I'm talking about. And I didn't get it right. He turned it into a north-south choke. And 3 minutes and 48 seconds, my career was over. But it was a great fight. It was not like my last one where I laid there underneath a guy suffering for 5 minutes. I'd much rather have it go the way I went. It went. So that's why the podcast didn't come out. And I had to put this one together because I couldn't make it back in time to do a recording. But, you know, I've been telling you about Pheasant Fest, right? And who was there and all my sponsors. You know who was with me? You know who was with me in Florida? None. Not one, not even my title sponsor, OnX, the title sponsor of your hunts, your trips, your golf outings, your real estate deals, your land surveying, whatever you do it with OnX. Gunner Kennels wasn't there. No, they weren't. DU Supply was not there. Garmin was, well, in a way, Garmin was there, but not at the tournament. The Instinct watch was on my wrist, so I got to give them some credit. K9 Athlete was, well, come to think of it, I brought Hydrate and Recover, and my little, no, they're not a sponsor, but my daughter, Mackie, gave me this Yeti mug, which it literally keeps things cold forever. And that was my hydration drink. So I guess, in a sense, K9 did come with me to the tournament. Mossberg did not, by choice, didn't need to bring a gun to this. I'd be afraid to walk in with a gun. If you've seen the killers that walk into this, thousands of competitors. And, of course, you know, the majority of them are about 25, 35 years old. And hold on a second. That's my wife. You know, that never fails to happen. If I don't put the recording sign on or put my phone on mute, someone always calls me while I'm doing this. Anyway, like I was saying, I did not bring a Mossberg shotgun there. And if I did, you couldn't have enough. These people would tear your limbs off your body. It's probably the safest place I've ever been in my life with, you know, like 2,000 black belts and let alone all the color belts. Anyway, so that was not with me. Boss Shot Shells, they didn't come down there with me. Nope. They're still making the best shotgun shells out there. I'm going to be doing a podcast with Brandon pretty soon about their new trap shooting with their target loads, with their steel target loads. But they're, you know, leave it to Brandon to tweak things and work with the wad and work with the what do you call it, the stuffing, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so I'm going to go down there pretty soon. I'm going down there pretty soon to see Brandon because I'm going to get my next load of beer from Watermark Brewery, which is in Stevensville, which is right where Boss is. Talk about a town with 2 things I love: Watermark Brewery beer and Boss Shot Shells within 2 miles of each other. Purina Pro Plan, sadly, they didn't come down to Florida either to help me out. Not that it would have helped me out much because that was on me. Walton's, they were not there. Now, Walton's is still there for you with the promo code of HDP10 for you general listeners. And, of course, patrons get a bigger one. And K9 Athlete, of course, was there, and they have the 25% off your first order with the promo code K9 Athlete. But I digress. Walton's was not there in any way, shape, or form. Marshwear was on my body the whole flight down, the whole flight back, and all my loungewear. Literally, I had Atifka shorts. Atifka? It's like a fishing short that they're owned by, or Marshwear is owned by them. And I had my Buxton pants on, and I had my silk hoodies. So I guess Marshwear was there kind of supporting me. Not on the mat. No, they weren't. Arxis was not there either. Jack did not come down to Florida to watch me get my ass handed to me. Nope. But he's there to help you keep your feet dry with the best rubber boots called Arxis. Go to ArxisUSA.com. When you talk to somebody at Arxis, you're only talking to one person. You're talking to Jack. And of course, being as I flew, my four-wheel camper was not with me. Now, I could tell you I had a patron with me, but I called him off. Mike, I know you're listening to this. Mike is one of the few listeners, let alone patrons of this show, that is also a jiu-jitsu practitioner. But when I got to this tournament, I realized he'd have to be way up in the stands. He couldn't be down on the floor unless he was a participator or a coach, and it got complicated. He was willing to come from Sarasota, and I could have used in hindsight, if I could have forged documents and said that he was my coach from Michigan, it might have been helpful, because having a coach on the floor with you. Anyway, that's not why I lost. I screwed up the omoplata, period. So, anyway, did I catch everybody? I think I did, right? Onyx, Gunner, W, Garmin, K9 Athlete, Mossberg, Boss Shot Shells, Purina Pro Plan, Waltons, Marshwear, Arxis. Oh, Marshwear, I forgot there, for all you regular listeners, not patrons. It's always more for patrons. All you regular listeners, go to Marshwear, use the code HTP15 and get 15% off purchase. That's better than a sharp stick in the eye. I talked about Arxis, talked about four-wheel campers. I mentioned Patreon enough to where enough of you that have been listening forever go like, all right, Ron, I'm already a patron. Or, all right, Ron, I've heard it enough. I'm not joining. Or if you're brand new, you're like, Ron, what's all this patron stuff about? Well, for those of you who might have just found out about me at Pheasant Fest a mere 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, you go to Patreon, Patreon.com, type in Hunting Dog Podcast, and you can become a patron of the show for a mere $5 or $10 a month. And you get extra content, you get video, you get parts of the Upland Institute every month. You get the Zoom rooms. You get the history of my dogs. Oh, my God. What you get for the price of a beer being a patron. And you get my phone number. Like, really, if you have some testing questions, whether it's NAVDA or Federation or VGJ, VH, you know what I'm talking about, the German system, the VDD, GNA stuff, you know that. You want to know where to go hunt? I'll steer you in the right direction. I ain't going to give you a pin. You want to know what kind of dog to get? I'll steer you in the right direction. I'm not going to tell you what one to buy, but I'm glad to help. All my patrons have my phone number. I'm not saying I've talked to all of them, but I have talked on the phone and hunted with most of them and hunted with a handful. And there's going to be a dove hunt. It's going to be very limited. It's going to be like 3 or 4 people in Virginia right after Labor Day, and only patrons are going to be up for that running. It's going to be very small. It's going to be worse odds than trying to pull a bull elk tag in Montana, because there's quite a few patrons. But that might sneak you in to say, you know what? Come to the next Zoom room, find out what it's all about. Maybe I'll put my hat in the ring. Maybe I want to drive down to Virginia, or maybe you already live in Virginia and you listen to this show. But then, of course, you already have probably a good spot to go dove hunting. I'm kind of thinking this is going to pull my Michigan northern friends down. Anyway, who knows? Anyway, this is the podcast I did. It was, well, you'll hear all about it. I don't need to introduce this one. It's called My First. Hey, everybody. This is a different kind of podcast. It kind of stemmed from 2 things. One, a guest that I was supposed to have as soon as I got home from Florida after fighting in a jiu-jitsu tournament. He couldn't make it on the phone. He couldn't make his appointment. I couldn't do the next day. And patron of mine named Josh in Montana wrote me an email, I don't know, probably a month ago or so. And he said, Ron, could I interview you because I'd like to ask you a lot of questions as a listener? And I said, Josh, I would do it, but my best friend in the whole world since I was about 5 years old, his name is Rusty Wolf. We call him Roof. A few of you patrons know him. He's been on a couple Zoom rooms back in the day. Best buddy, we talk every morning. And I said, Josh, Roof's been wanting to do that with me for years. Like, I want to interview you. And that may still happen. But Josh sent me a bunch of questions. And then when I was talking to Roof about it, and even though we were at Pheasant Fest together, we were out on the floor all day, going out to restaurants and bars at night, and we never made it happen. And because my guest couldn't come on this week, I'm going to take a piece of what a lot of people have asked me, what Josh asked me, what I know Roof would ask me, and this will be kind of a continuing thing. In fact, what I'd like you to do is if you have a question, it's kind of a, what would you call it? Ask me anything? Ask me anything you want to ask me? No, some of them I may not answer. You could ask me about my first wife. You could ask me about, first time I got arrested. You could ask me. I'd rather you keep me questions about hunting and, dogs and training and trainers I've met. And I'll get into it. I'll get into it as deep as I can get into it without, a defamation lawsuit against me. So down the road, if you ever have a question you want to just ask me, like, I wonder if Ron would answer this question, you can write me at ronb@thehuntingdogpodcast. Send me that question. If you're a patron, you can send it through the Patreon page. Or you could always ask me on a Patreon Zoom night if you're a Patreon or a patron of Patreon. But, so, this is called My Firsts. And the first question, who was your favorite dog? Well, that's that thing, where people say, my favorite dog or my best dog? Well, I got to go with my favorite dog, and that was the first dog that I ever had. I'm not saying my parents bought it for me, but my sisters were older than me, and my mom's friend, Alice Simon, she occasionally bred miniature collies. And for some reason, maybe this one had a fault, or maybe this one wasn't a show quality dog, and she gave our family a little, what I call miniature collie. I was also told it was called a Shetland sheepdog. I don't know what it was. Kind of looked like a collie, kind of looked small, and there's some old picture I got of me and that dog back in the day. And that dog's name was Sandy. So I guess, your first has got to be your favorite. Now, there's other ones in your life, whether it's dogs or partners, they might become better than your first or your favorite, but you can't deny your favorite's usually your first. If you really think about it, Sandy was. We grew up in Chicago. And we had these 40-foot lots that are about 100 feet deep from the street to the alley. And most people had a dog back in the day, but most people's dogs they lived in the backyard. They lived in a dog house in the backyard. A few people left them in the house. None of my friends' parents did. And Sandy lived in our basement, the basement of our house. And he would come in at night. And he'd walk around the back room. We'd pet him, and I'd lay with him on the floor and kind of wrestle with him. And now, granted, when we got him, I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. But when he died, I was working as a busboy at Caesar's Restaurant in Chicago. So I didn't have a car. And I remember my dad came to pick me up from work. And I knew Sandy was getting old, moving slow. And if I told you how Sandy lived, you'd probably be like, oh my God, Ron, your parents were horrible. But no, Sandy kind of lived in the yard and came in at night. And then as soon as everybody kind of got done petting him, my dad would open the basement door. Sandy would walk downstairs. and sleep on a blanket down there. And back in the day, it was called paper training. And I know only a few of you listening to this are my age and can remember that you trained dogs to go pee and poop on newspaper. Well, there was a couple reasons for that. We all got the daily news. The paper was delivered to your house every day, and that was the thing. You trained you called it paper. You didn't call it house training. You called it, they were paper trained. And I'm not making this shit up, okay? So Sandy was paper trained. So Sandy would go downstairs and we'd lay out about, a big Chicago Tribune newspaper. We'd lay out about 4 pages worth in a, maybe double layer it. And Sandy, for his whole life, other than when he was out in the yard during the day, take a whiz bang or a poop, he would go in the basement and he would pee on the paper and he would poop on the paper. And my parents thought that was a great success, and I thought that was, I didn't know any different. I had other friends whose dogs were paper trained. And my job was to go downstairs in the morning and take this paper and roll it up like butcher paper, like fold in the corners, roll over the turd, roll over the pee. Usually the pee was dry from the night before, but not always. And you just rolled that paper up like you were rolling up a pork loin in butcher paper. And my job was to carry that out to the garbage and then put down some new Tribune newspaper pages. So for my first was my first favorite dog was Sandy. It's a dog that, like I said, there's a picture of me. I'm going to say I was about 7, maybe I was 8. I'll try to find it and put it up on Instagram one of these days. And he was there until I was 15. And I know we had him before that, or before I was 7 or 8. But he was my buddy on rainy days, on days when we didn't go out and play baseball, or we didn't, go out on the streets and run down the alleys. I would have Sandy come back in the house, and we'd just sit there and we'd watch, Garfield Goose or whatever there wasn't a lot of kids programming on back in the day. But so Sandy. I'm going to say he was a miniature collie / Shetland sheepdog. I feel better about the miniature collie. They look like the collie. And going along with this theme of firsts, okay, my first bird, the first bird I ever shot. Well, that comes with a little caveat. There's birds you shoot with BB guns. There was some pheasants that I trapped in the cemetery. I know some of you know these stories, but I'll tell more on Patreon. When I grew up in Chicago, there was 2 cemeteries that bordered our neighborhood, and we were landlocked by railroad tracks and the cemetery. So that's where me and my friends went out and played. We ran around, we climbed trees, oh my God, at one point, me and my friend Ricky, we went up into a pine tree and we did steal some baby crows because we wanted to have a crow for a pet. Highly illegal. I wouldn't call it highly illegal. Back in those days, they would have just took the pet away from us. But anyway, so we kind of explored these cemeteries. So the first bird, I guess, that I killed was a hen pheasant in a number 1 long spring trap, because this piece of cemetery had still prairie grass in it, very undeveloped, the southern half of this evergreen cemetery. And but the first bird I remember shooting, what I'm going to say was a wild bird. I had a buddy that when I started working, his name was Larry Bertfa, and he lived out in Stager or Crete, or was it Crete? No, Frank lives in Crete. I think he lived in Stager. And he came to work for the same company I did. Now, I'm going to go back because I used to go hunting in high school at state release places. But I'm talking about my first wild bird. So Larry invited me when I got to know him. He says, yeah, my brother-in-law and my father-in-law, we go hunting, usually on every weekend. And when he's out of, we worked out of town a lot. Larry and I, we were out of town partners. meaning our job was always on the road. But in the fall, when he was home, his brother-in-law and his father-in-law and him, they went hunting. They went pheasant hunting and rabbit hunting. And my first pheasant came along the railroad tracks right near their house. I was there early. And these are the days when you came into somebody's house you didn't know and you were welcomed like family. And I remember Larry's mother-in-law. She goes, "Are you hungry?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm hungry." She made me eggs. She had some bacon on the side and some hash browns. And everybody called their dad the old man. So Larry's brother-in-law was Tony. Tony said, "The old man's going to wait for Larry. He doesn't want to go." And Larry be his son-in-law, my friend. And so Tony says, "Let's take a walk down by the railroad tracks and see if we can find a bird." And I'm like, yeah. Because like I said, the few pheasants I ever got were in a long spring trap with corn glued with Elmer's glue on the trap plate because we trapped them out in the cemetery. And then the other pheasants I shot were at Iroquois County Hunting Preserve, not a hunting preserve, Iroquois County State Game Management Area where they released pheasants. And even then I knew it wasn't real, but it was fun, you know. But anyway, got to know Larry, got invited. Larry was late, and Tony and I took a walk right out of their house, maybe a quarter mile, and started hunting the railroad tracks. And this rooster pheasant comes up, and I pulled up on that bird, and one shot, and it folded, and it hit right between the rails, just dead as a doornail. And I'll never forget that shot as long as I live. I also remember because Tony thought that he hit it. Now, Tony was shooting a 20 gauge with a short barrel, and not that I knew Tony really well. He did end up working with Larry and I later, but I knew I was a pretty good shot from being a trap shot. And I was shooting, well, something I'll go into in my next first. I was shooting my first shotgun. It's the first shotgun I ever had. And that was a Remington 1100 TB trap. I got that from Mr. Gorman, who was my friend Joe Gorman's dad, who was a detective on the Chicago Police Department. He was a member of the Downers Grove Sportsman's Club and responsible for me at about age 14 to be able to skip church and go with them on Sunday mornings to Downers Grove Sportsman's Club. That's how I finally got out of going to church. My mom and dad thought, well, that was good. At least I was hanging out with family. But anyway, backing up to that first bird, I thought for sure I hit it. And he says, "Oh, I got it." I said, "You didn't get it." And it was kind of like, yeah, I did. I said, "No, you didn't." I mean, this was almost a straightaway out of the ditch down the tracks kind of a shot. And it was a poke. Now, I'm running with this Remington 1100 TB trap, 30-inch full choke. So in my mind, and I'll take it to my grave, that was the first wild bird that I ever shot. And if Tony ever listens to this podcast, which I doubt if he does, I don't even know if he's still alive, he might argue with me. But I bet you he remembers that day because we talked about it over the years at work, arguing about who hit that bird, and I kept doing ballistics on it. And he kept saying, no, I was closer to it. I said, doesn't matter. I got it. So that was my first bird along the railroad tracks near Crete, Illinois. And it's still in my memory. I can see the bird getting up. I can see the bird falling. I can see the railroad tracks. And it was one of them pheasants, when it hit the ground, it was dead, which for years later on, that didn't always happen. So to go backwards a little bit, my first point, my first dog that I saw on point. So this predates my first pheasant. But my friends and I, there was occasionally Bruce Ruby, Joe Gorman was a constant, Frank Beckfire was a constant, Rusty Wolf was a constant, and occasionally Jimmy Karras, which you'll hear later on in one of my firsts. We would go down to the Iroquois County Conservation Area, and the state of Illinois had these release sites. One was in Des Plaines, Illinois, one was in Iroquois County, and I really can't remember where the other one was. Just it's escaping me now, and I know I never went to it, or I might remember. And the way it worked in Illinois was you could apply for a week. Well, you everybody was applying for a weekend except retired people. They could always get in during the week, but the wild this thing accompanied the wild pheasant season. It ran concurrently with it. They didn't open it up early in August or September or October. In Illinois, the season opened up in November. And so the state-run place, the state put and take, followed all the same guidelines. You were allowed 2 birds. Upside was they were hens or roosters because they were released the night before. I think during the week they just had scratch birds. I'm not sure if they were released, but I know on Friday nights and Saturday nights they released birds off of a flatbed trailer because when we were there a lot, me and my friends. And what we would do is we would apply for a date. And every once in a while we get that one, you get one date. But the beauty of it is you applied for this stuff in the spring and the summer. And inevitably, whoever got permits, something got in the way, whether it was graduation or an extra shift at work or, something going wrong at home. There was a will call line that you could park in. Now, during the week, that will call line, it was, you could probably be 10, 12 cars back and still get in, but not on the weekends, unless you did what we did. So we would always have our one day that we got, or at least the majority of us got, and we would go for that Saturday. But what we learned from talking to the people there was you come here on a Friday night and you get in the will call line, and if you're within the first 3 vehicles, which wasn't like all pickup trucks like we have now. Everybody's driving cars, station wagons. In fact, we were always in Frank Beckfar's grandmother's car. Now you'd think, it wasn't a 52 Hudson. This was in 1972 and 3. And 72, 73, maybe a little 74. And Frank was fortunate enough to be gifted in his family a 1960 Chevy Impala. Had the flat wings on the back, not the vertical wings, had the flat wings on the back. We used to go to the drive-in in that car. We could put 3 guys in the trunk of that car, and there could be 4 guys in the car, and then 3 of us could get in for free, and then we'd all double up and triple up in the front and back seats. And we called it the Beckmobile because Frank's name was Beckfar. So we would be in line in the Beckmobile the night before. So we would get there in the evening, and we would all just kind of halfway try to sleep in the car. Now, I will tell you, usually, even at our young, tender age, meaning none of us were old enough to buy a drink back then, Illinois didn't try the 19-year-old age until I was 19, and this was before I was 19. Joe Gorman, who I mentioned was always on these trips, Joe was a guy that had a shave in sophomore year of high school. Joe went to St. Dennis, and we all went to the public schools. I don't know what it was about that Irishman, but that man had to, I call him a man. That man had a shave, or he had a 5 o'clock shadow. I know you've all met a few guys like that. Maybe you're like that. And back in the day, liquor stores, taverns were a little different. Taverns didn't want kids in there. In fact, Monty's Tavern near my house actually had a sign on the door, 25 years of age or older to come into this establishment. And Chicago police weren't going to do anything about it. If the owner of that tavern wanted you to be 25 years old, you couldn't go there. But liquor stores, all owned by just mom and Mary, or mom and dad 12 gauge. I shouldn't say that. Mom and dad 6-pack. They would sell alcohol to anybody who looked 18 years old. Joe always looked 18 years old. So when we would go down to Iroquois County the night before, there was always a case or more of beer in the car. And that was kind of the only way we could really sleep in the car. We would drink beer, we would laugh, we'd get all excited about the next day. We weren't driving anywhere, but we were just in line. And we were usually number 1, number 2, number 3. And rarely were we ever, not early enough in line to get in, because these permits they gave out, like I said, people inevitably didn't make the date because they applied for it in, let's say June. And so we would go down to Iroquois County, and we went there a lot. We got there so long that we got to know the officers there and the workers there, and they even let us ride on the flatbed truck and help the guy release the birds at dusk the evening before you hunted. And no, we didn't throw extra birds into Area 12 because we didn't know where we were going to be in the morning on a will call. But, we knew where the birds were going to be, the bulk of them. And that was kind of like our hangout. And where this is going to is my first bird pointed. This had nothing to do with the dog I owned. I remember it was Frank and myself and Roof. Might have been one more guy. Might have been Bruce that time. But what you do is after you hunted the morning, you went back and you checked your birds in. And for 2 reasons. Some of them were hens. Half of them were always hens. And they would put a tag on them. And they would give you a transportation tag like a hunt preserve does. Only it was from the state of Illinois. Like if you got pulled over, he said, oh, yeah, here's the permit from the state. Here's the 2 birds I paid for. And we went back there. I remember we went back. They always had chili, and it always tasted the same. I always thought it was the same vat of chili that they made like in November, and they just kept adding to it because it never tasted any different. Put the crackers in it, and that was usually our lunch. And this older guy came in. Now, granted, we were older. He was probably 40, but we were in our teens. And he said, I saw you guys came in a little late. And we're like, sorry, sir, what? And he says, well, I saw you carrying your birds in for the check-in station, and, there's 4 of you, and you only had 5 birds. I said, yeah, we don't always get our birds, we just like coming here. And I was almost always, when Joe was there, he was even more the mouthpiece than me. But I was never shy to talk to adults. And I said, we come down here all the time, and we don't have a dog, but we just love it. We go out and, birds will get up or birds will come in from some other area that somebody else put up. And, we just love it. And he said, well, I got a dog that needs some more work. I didn't know what that meant. And, picture going to a state preserve with your hunting dog, because that's what you could do or had to do, or it's what you had the time for. And if you had a good hunting dog, and these were just put out the night before, finding 2 birds, which is your limit, it's not difficult to do. So, when we went back at lunch, and this happened time and time again, there's barely anybody in the parking lot, because the guys that with dogs, they came in, they got their birds, they went back home. They're probably eating breakfast at 10 o'clock back in Kankakee, Illinois, which is just north of Iroquois County, or it's in Iroquois County. And he said, would you guys want to go out and try to get the rest of your birds over my dog? And we're like, well, yeah, I guess, sure. Well, we had nothing to do. We were kids. It was a Saturday. And this guy had a liver and tick German short hair. And there's a piece of me that could remember that dog's name, but I'd be lying to you if I said it was Nick or Duke. But it was one of them names, like that short with a K, Kirk. I don't know what it was. But I remember this dog was beautiful. I've never seen a German short hair in my life. I shouldn't say that. We'd see him in the parking lot with Brittany's and Weimaraners, and, we'd see him, the guys who were coming there to only spend an hour to get their birds. But this guy, we were like, he's befriended us, and I could see where, in hindsight, later on, why wouldn't he come up to somebody and say, hey, did you get your birds? I got a dog. We could go out after, try to get the rest of your birds. And we followed this guy down the road, and we hit one of the parking areas, and he took his dog out, and I don't remember the details. I do remember he had a bell on it. There was no collar on it because this is 1970, let's just say 3, for lack of a better year. And that dog jumped out of the truck and started running around, had a bell on it. And he's now, boys, just watch the dog. Watch the dog. Watch the dog. And we're watching the dog. And we're kind of all looking at each other like, this is so cool. This is so cool. And we're going to get more birds. And I should go back to, when we got home, my dad didn't hunt, but my dad thought that, me bringing home some pheasants was always great. That was, he made dinner on those nights. David's dad, he hunted for years and brought pheasants and rabbits home. So that was nothing new in the Anagnos house. And I'm sure in the Gorman house and in the Karras house and in the Ruby house, it was always appreciated. But we didn't get that many all the time. In fact, I'll bet you all the times we went there, rarely did all of us limit out. David would, because David would just walk further than we did. But anyway, we're watching this dog, and we're kind of all looking at each other, and we got our guns, straight up in the air, and we're trying to be safe. And all of a sudden, I see this dog go, ping! We're like, it was like the four of us were like looking at the guy like, what's he doing? He said, he's telling you there's a bird in front of him. We're like, get the fuck out of here. And he said, just walk up, guys. Just walk up past the dog. And we walked up past the dog. I don't know who hit that bird. I'm going to guess we all did. That bird was pasted. And that dog, it's funny, I would love to know who that guy was, and I guarantee you he's dead now because I'm 67, and he'd have to be at least 87 in his 90s. So just in case this guy's out there, this guy's related to you and ever told you a story about these 4 boys from Chicago that he took out with his German short hair, deep liver and tick, muscular dog, big dog. If that ever happened, I'd love to know who it was. But that was the dog I first saw on point, and that stuck with me forever. Now, we went on to shoot, I think we had to make up, with 4 of us, I think, we probably had to make up 3 birds, and that didn't take very long with this dog and these, the state-released birds. And I don't remember the rest of them. I remember the first one. I remember all of our guns going up. I remember the bird just falling out of the sky. And I remember that dog being released, meaning that guy was training his dog. Now, he certainly wasn't in NAVDA back then. I guess technically he could have been, but 73? And I doubt there was a NAVDA chapter there. But he had a trained German short hair. It stuck with me forever. In my head, if I'm on my deathbed and my kid said, Dad, tell us a story about the first point you ever saw from a pointing dog. If I can't tell him that story, it's time to put the pillow over my face. And I've told him that. And, of course, my daughters say, Dad, we're not doing that. I said, I wish you would. So that was my first point that I ever witnessed on a bird dog. So kind of double back in here. The other point I made here was my first shotgun, which I already told you was a Remington 1100. And that was from when I told you Joe Gorman's dad was the family who took us, in high school. I believe it was sophomore year. He took us to the Downers Grove Sportsman Club, and he always gave me this Remington 1100 to shoot. And I learned to clean it. We would come back. His dad was fastidious about, even though he was a cop, he was kind of a cabinet maker. He was a machinist. He had his own mill and lathe in the garage. And we would have to clean the guns. Now, it was funny because they all shot. Kind of like, you had to wonder about this. A cop in Chicago with 8 kids. They all went to Catholic school. He had a mill and a lathe in his garage. You see where I'm going? He was a member of a sportsman's club. He reloaded his own ammunition. And his kids were all shooting Browning Superposed. Yeah, Browning Superposed. Beautiful, expensive guns. At that point, I think those were all made in Belgium. But it had this Remington 1100 TB trap that was a 30-inch barrel commemorative gun from Winchester, or I'm sorry, from Remington. And that was the gun that I shot on Sundays. And right before we graduated high school, he asked me if I wanted to buy that gun. Now, I wasn't old enough to buy the gun. Funny thing is, in Illinois, you could hunt at 16, but you couldn't buy a gun or ammunition until you were 18. I don't know how, I don't remember if it was cloudy or muddy, the waters on what was legal. Were we supposed to have a parent with us? I don't know. I don't remember. I know that we went down to that Iroquois State place with our hunting license that you could buy at 16, and there was never anybody checking us. So I know we were legal, but you couldn't buy the gun. So my dad, in fact, I still have the Illinois registration for that gun. My dad bought that from Mr. Gorman. I bought it because I was a busboy and I saved my money. It was $275. Now, you could have got a lot cheaper shotguns in 1975 at either Sears or Ward's or the Oaklawn Gun Shop, which, we used to go to once in a while to look at the taxidermy. But, back in the day, even Corvettes and, not dime stores, but they sold guns in any of the department stores. And but I had this beautiful wood with a Monte Carlo stock. This thing weighed a little over 8 pounds. I looked it up on Google, and the Remington 1100 TB trap weighed 8 pounds, but you put your shells in it, and it was a little over 8 pounds, but it didn't bother me a bit. And that was the first shotgun that I owned, even though it was in my dad's name. We never retransferred it. It's still in my gun case. And if I had to get rid of all my guns, I'd hang on to that one. Now, it wouldn't be real handy in the grouse woods, but I got that from Mr. Gorman, and like I said, I shot with them for a couple years, not every Sunday, but maybe 15, 20 Sundays a year. I'd go with them, depending on the season and what was going on at home, and that was my first gun, and I own 3 Remington 1100s to this day. I still do. In fact, there's a great story about that, and I'll save that for a Patreon podcast one day. Another one I was thinking about was my first out-of-state hunt, which, at that age, we didn't even, I don't even know if we knew where Iowa was, okay? We grew up in the city. We were city rats. Where we went pheasant hunting was only an hour outside of Chicago. But because me and my friends were all kind of into the trapping the pheasants, and me and Ricky and his brother Donnie got into taxidermy, and we were kind of the weirdos in school. I literally did not have a girlfriend in high school. I wasn't gay. Don't just because we swam naked in Chicago public schools, that's got nothing to do with it. Okay? But I never had a girlfriend in Chicago, or in high school in Chicago. Funny thing is, my first wife, I went to high school with her. We knew each other. She was always dating somebody older and better looking than me. Ended up marrying her later on. But no, never had a girlfriend. So we were kind of nerdy. We were always out in the cemetery digging forts and running a trap line along the railroad tracks. We were just kind of an odd group of guys. And I used to get Outdoor Life magazine. And Ricky's brother Donnie was a little older than us, 2 years older than us. And he kind of led the charge. He had a vehicle, and we would go out to the forest preserves and look for dead critters like dead raccoon or dead anything. And we would try to do taxidermy on it. And I don't know if he was at my house or if I brought a magazine over, but one of us got this ad for hunt wild boar in Tennessee. And it said boar, turkey, ram. I didn't even know what a ram was. But we decided for our senior class trip, so this is in the spring, just about this time of year, in the spring of 1975 that we were going to go down to Cariona Hunting Lodge and go hunt wild boar. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. It was me, Donnie, Ricky's older brother, and Jimmy Karras and Dave and Agnes. Now, Dave had his dad's Ithaca. His dad had a Mythica Model 37. Jimmy bought a Wingmaster, and I should really say in clarity, Jimmy's dad bought him. I'm sure Jimmy paid for it because I know Ed. He wasn't going to pay for shit. But Jimmy had a beautiful, in fact, it was a 2-barrel set 870 Wingmaster. So he had a trap barrel and a skeet barrel on it. So we were going to do slugs on these boar. Well, I couldn't do a slug through my 1100 TB trap with a full choke, but Jimmy could. So I was going to have to do buckshot. And you got to picture this back in the day. We had to write a letter and send a deposit in and wait for them to write us a letter back. Nobody even got on the phone. We borrowed from my father, Al Bame, which is why a lot of people back in those days called me Little Al. We borrowed my dad's 69 Buick. Now you might be thinking 1975, that was not that old of a car. That was only a 6-year-old car. But back in the 60s and 70s, these cars didn't last very long, and these engines weren't very good. This thing leaked a little oil. And my dad said, all right, you can use the car. You can go down there. But you got to check the oil every time you get gas because this thing burned oil. That's a whole nother story I'll tell about later. But our first trip, my first out-of-town, out-of-state hunting trip, was down to Tennessee, and we went boar hunting. And they had packs of dogs. They had these old Willys Jeeps, and we were around Crossville, Tennessee at the Cariona Hunting Lodge and bopping up around the hills. And David, even though he brought his dad's Ithaca, David brought a bow. Now, we all had bows when we were in our teens, but we had fiberglass bows. Dave got a wood recurve bow. It was probably a Bear bow. Might have been, I don't know the other brands back then, but might have been a Bear. And he had a quiver. And I'll never forget, he shot his pig standing in the water with the dogs just coming at it. And every time the dogs would back up, the guy would say, shoot it again. That thing looked like a pin cushion when Dave was done with it. So I don't think it had a heck of a draw length or the poundage was probably pretty light. It was probably a 35-pound bow or something. But I shot mine with a shotgun. Donnie was older than us. Donnie shot his with a pistol. Jimmy shot his with a shotgun, and so did I. And that first trip, I'll never forget this the rest of my life. Our guide's name was Buttons. Why wouldn't it be? Buttons. And so I think by day 2, it was like a 3-day hunt. He said by day 2, we had our pigs. It wasn't guaranteed, but they had dogs, and it was up in the hills of Tennessee, and there was no way I would call it high fence because there was no high fences, but there was cattle fences, but hogs could go through and under, and but god damn it, that was fun. I'm surprised I didn't become a houndsman. After that German short hair at Iroquois County. But after that trip, chasing pigs and listening to the dogs just wailing and the pigs squealing, I'm surprised I didn't become a houndsman. But anyway, Buttons came up to us like the next morning. We'd all got in fact, there's still some pictures of this somewhere. I got to find them. We had the pigs all hanging up. Now, we didn't even know how to skin a big game like that, and the guides did it for us, but we got a picture of us all standing there with our pigs. And the guide says, any of you boys want to go turkey hunting? And we've never seen a turkey. Never seen a turkey in our whole life. We know what they are. Don't know how to hunt them. And I kind of said, I would. And I said, well, how do we do it? He says, well, it was, I remember this. Again, legal or not legal. They probably had tags, maybe on their property. But it was $50 to the lot. I paid $50 to go out with Buttons and go after a turkey. To this day, I'm still not a turkey hunter. But that day, I was a turkey hunter with my Remington 1100 30-inch barrel TB trap. And Buttons, we get in a Jeep, and we're poking up these mountains, and I don't mean mountains like Tennessee mountains, up and down these trails, and he parks off on the side of the road, and we walk up this trail, and we get into this big rock pile. And Button says, sit down, get yourself comfortable. And he takes out this box call, and he's like, and I remember thinking, what the fuck is he doing? What in the fuck is he doing? I didn't know. I knew less than zero about turkey hunting. I just know I wanted to pull the trigger. And he said, does anybody want to go turkey hunting? I said, I do. And so I'm sitting inside kind of in the rock pile, and he's behind the rock pile. And he's only probably 6-7 feet from me. And finally, I hear that. He goes, you hear him? I said, yeah, I heard it. I said, where is it? He said, just keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open. And I got that shotgun, like just under my armpit. And I'm looking over these rocks, and I don't see nothing, And he's, and he's like, there he is. There he is. I said, where? He goes, he's right there. And I don't see shit. Because honestly, the only turkey I ever saw was on Thanksgiving Day at our house. Never saw one with a head on it. Didn't know it would be all red and blue and white and standing up with a big wattle under its neck. And I'm looking around. I'm looking for a turkey, a big, round, butterball turkey. Not without feathers, but not with the pop-up timer in it. But I'm looking for a turkey body. And what he sees is just this head coming through. And I'm like, where? He's like, right up front of you. Look at it. And I finally see it. And I'm like, oh my God, is that ugly? It looked like a thing from a science fiction movie. And it keeps coming closer and closer. And I'm telling you, this thing was it was kind of like hopping over, like the rock pile we were in, kind of decimated just down to the woods floor. But there were still a few rocks, and he was getting up and over a few rocks. And I'll never forget this. Button says, shoot, shoot. Now, on my mother's grave, I did not know you were supposed to shoot them while they were on the ground. Not that I was Mr. Ethical Sportsman. Not that I never shot a pheasant when it was running down a trail at Iroquois County. Not saying I never did that. I just didn't know that you were just supposed to shoot him in the head like a sniper. I did not know that. And Buttons is going, shoot, shoot. And he's got this country drawl, like, shoot, shoot. I'm thinking it's got to be flying. And I'm also thinking, like, I know you're not supposed to shoot birds on the ground or on the water. That was in my head. Because even at that point, I knew, like, Ethical Sportsmen shot birds on the wing. And again, on my mother's grave, this bird was not 10 yards from us. And his head's just poking up. And I stand up. And Buttons goes, what are you doing? I went, yah! I don't know how I got yah out of that, but I got yah, like I was screaming at the bird because I wanted to make it fly. And it started running. And I heard Buttons cuss. He goes, God damn it, son! And right when he said son, that bird was running about 15 yards, and it took wing. And I led that right over the frickin' bird's head and folded it with that 30-inch barrel, number 6 lead. Folded it, crushed its head, hit the ground, and that guide for the next, well, it would be day and a half, a day, that half a day and the next day when we had breakfast and left. If he didn't tell that story to anybody that would listen at the lodge, whether it was a new guy that was just coming in or the cook or the other guides or the guy that owned the lodge, he said, that's old boy from Chicago. He says, yeah! And he shoots that bird on the wing. And That was my first turkey hunt. That was my first out-of-state hunt. And that memory is better than my first pig when I got there, which it was fun. But it's kind of like you shot the pig and it fell down. I mean, it just, boom. Anyway, that was my first out-of-state hunt. Senior class trip. Everybody else was going down to Texas and Florida, whether they were getting in the cars and driving together or a few kids had enough. We were lower middle class income, so not a lot of people were flying. But, people that went away for senior class trip, they went down to go drink in freedom and be crazy. And me and my friends went to Tennessee. That was our first out-of-town trip. Now, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but the first time being arrested or detained, also because it comes in with a hunting story. Fast forward a few years, I'm still relying on the Iroquois County put and take that the state runs because, I didn't know landowners, and not that I was afraid to talk to people, but literally there wasn't a lot of pheasants around Illinois, even then, unless you really knew somebody who had some. Back then there wouldn't be CRP. It might have been Soil Bank. They were still plowing fence line to fence line then. We didn't see pheasants on the side of the road driving down to Iroquois. But anyway, I went down there I got married in 1980. And I went down there in the winter of 1980, or the November. And my son-in-law, Ricky DiLorenzo, son-in-law, my apologies, my brother-in-law, he was Debbie's brother, younger brother, and we're still in contact today. We talk at least once a year, and we rehash this story every time. He was interested because he had an older brother, but back in those days, your older brother didn't like your younger brother. He loved his new to-be someday brother-in-law. He wanted to go hunting with us down to Iroquois. So me and Jimmy Karras and him went down, and we got in line at the will call line. We went in the night before. We drank a bunch of beer, but we didn't make it. We were like 2 cars back from when the guy come down the line, gives you your permit. He looks at the rest of us. He's like, nope. Puts his, the fingers under the throat. Nope, no more permits today. And I'm like, son of a bitch. I really wanted to take Ricky out. I even had, at that point, between when I started hunting and now, 1980, which I was, what was I? 57, I don't know, 21, 22 maybe. My grandfather had died, and he was not a hunter, but he lived in rural Illinois, mid-southern Illinois. And there was a 410 shotgun that was always in the counter of the pantry, or in the corner of the pantry. And he always had a shotgun shell, like a 12-gauge shell, over the barrel just to keep shit out of it. And Grandpa only kept that thing around. It was one of those hardware stores. It was from Western Auto. And that was always in the corner. You never were allowed to ask him about it. Nobody ever touched it. I think he just used it in case there was a fox in the hen house back in the day, or a squirrel that was, getting into the little bitty garden they had in the backyard. And those days, you didn't ask your grandma and grandpa anything. They're not like me and my wife, grandma and grandpa, where we babysit and we mollycoddle them. Grandma and grandpas were figureheads. So, but anyway, when grandpa died, I asked my mom and her sisters and her brothers that were all there. I said, none of them hunted. I said, can I have that shotgun? And like, yeah, of course you can. It was a 410. So I brought that 410 for Ricky. Jimmy had his beautiful, and I thought my 1100 was beautiful. Jimmy got this that combo set 870 Wingmaster. It had prettier wood, and I don't think the bluing was any better, but it was a gorgeous gun. I was envious of it. Even though I never learned to use a pump shotgun well, when you hear somebody using a pump shotgun, there's something romantic about that. Anyway, so it's a no-go. So we're thinking maybe we could knock on a door somewhere on the way home. But we're from Iroquois County back up to Cook County. It ain't very far. And we weren't probably going to take back roads, but our idea was, well, if we see a farm or if we see a field, let's ask. Well, we were no more than 3 miles away from the place, and a DNR officer pulls up behind us, hits the lights. We pull over, and says, "How you doing, guys?" I mean, this guy was super friendly. I wish I had his name to this day. I'm sure he's dead now too. Everything I know from back in the 70s, they're all dead, of course. And he says, "What are you guys doing today?" I said, "Well, we went down to Iroquois County, got in the will call line," and I said, "But it was a no-go, so we were thinking of maybe knocking on a door on the way home." He says, "That's a good idea." He said, "You might find a bird." And he says, "Do you have your FOID card?" Now, I know most of you are going to draw a complete blank when I say this. Only if you lived in Illinois were you cursed with this rule. In Illinois, you had to have a firearms owner's identification card, FOID. And I applied for mine in high school. Jimmy applied for his in high school. Ricky didn't need one. Ricky was young enough to go with us as long as because we were older. And he says, he said, "I wouldn't bother you, but they're kind of cracking down. They want to make sure people, have their FOID card. When you got your card?" I said, "Oh, yeah, 100%. Pull out my wallet, open it up. I'm all proud, and I hand him the FOID card. Now, it looks pretty much like an Illinois driver's license back in the day. That's wrong. An Illinois driver's license was paper, and I laminated this one. But it had a picture of you. I used my high school graduation picture with this Prince Valiant haircut, which is so embarrassing. And he looks at it and he goes, he said, "Ron, when you applied for this?" I said, "Oh, yeah, years ago." He says, "Yeah, that's the problem. It's expired. It expired this last summer." I'm like, "Oh, well, we're going to go straight home." He goes, I know, and he looks over at my friend. He says, "What's your name?" And so Ricky's in the back of the van, my son, my brother-in-law. And Jimmy, one of my other best friends from grade school and church, Jimmy's like, "Oh, yeah, I got it. And Jimmy hands him his FOID card. And he says to him, "Jim?" He says, "Yes, sir." He says, "You known Ron a long time, haven't you?" He says, "Yeah, we were in grade school together. In fact, we started." He's like, No. He says, I'm being a little sarcastic. "You've known him long enough that you applied for your FOID cards at the same time." He said, Yeah, we both got into shooting, and we both went to Downers Grove. Jimmy's just rattling this away, He goes, "No, you're missing my point. Both of your cards are expired." Well, I'm not sure where that cut off, but I looked at my recorder, and it went blank. So where I was saying was when the DNR officer asked Jimmy, "You known Ronnie a long time?" He said, "Yeah, he went on and on." He goes like, "Well, you both applied for your cards at the same time." And I'm like, "Well, what do we got to do?" He says, "Well, guys, I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to bring you down to the county jail." Now, this Iroquois County looked like it was like Mayberry. I mean, literally like Mayberry. He never put us in cuffs. He let us follow him all the way to the jail. He just said, "They've just been cracking down on this, and I've just got to do what I got to do, guys. I'm sorry." And back in our day, you didn't argue with a cop. You didn't try to say, "Well, couldn't we just?" No, you didn't do that shit. And I'm like, "Oh, all right." Now again, this is pre-cell phone, pre-beepers, pre-everything. So we get there. Ricky's not in trouble because he's 16. He wasn't expected to have an FOID card. And we got to make bail. And, I mean, it was small. Bail is 10%. I think it was a $200 fine, and we needed $20. But we didn't have squat between me and Jimmy. So I got to call my first wife, Debbie. This is Ricky's sister. But I can't get a hold of her. I've only got the phone number. Back in the day, you memorized your girlfriend's and your cousin's phone numbers. Like Ricky's was P072960. How did I get that? My old phone number was LU23775. This is coming out of me like right now, like I got Tourette's syndrome. Joe's was the same as Ricky's, except the 2960 was 6920. So you knew numbers. I didn't get an answer. Ricky was 16 years old, just got his driver's license. I sent him home with my Chevy van all the way back up. It's about an hour, maybe a little over an hour. He had to navigate, never been on the road, in his life, just got his driver's license. I told him, I said, you get on 57 North and you look for the signs for 294. You get off at 95th Street, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he got home, found his sister. Jimmy and I are in jail for hours, but the guy was so cool. He says, look, we ain't got nothing for you to eat. We'll get you something later if this gets long, but I'm not going to lock the door. There's a hall bathroom over here. Like Mabel's up at the front desk. I mean, he knew we were not innocent, but he knew we were harmless. And I'll never forget, Jimmy and I were just sitting in that cell and just laying there trying to take a nap, but we were getting giddy. And finally Debbie shows up, brings the van, because Ricky drove it back, and comes down there and kind of reads me a little bit of a riot act. Anyway, yeah, so that was my first. That's a hunting story, but it was my first time ever being detained by police, and the second time was 30 years later when I tried to go to the airport and I had a loaded pistol in my carry-on. So we're going to save that for another day. I know some of you have heard that story. The next first that I think is relevant is my first hunt when I got to Michigan. So all this is happening in Illinois, and there's a lot more stuff that happened when I was in Illinois. But when I moved to Michigan, I met a guy named Jeff Peterman. Jeff's been on the podcast a couple times. Once, he's actually on the first ever podcast we ever did. Now, if you want to listen to something if you like all this nostalgia, and I know most of you don't know this, or I'm going to say most of you, being over 50%, when you go on iTunes or Spotify or Apple Play, whatever you're doing, you're only going to see so many episodes up there. They're not going to load your entire library up. But if you go into archives, if you go to Libsyn, Lybson or LIBSYN.com, and then /Hunting Dog Podcast, they've got all the episodes. That stays in there forever. Till when I'm dead for 80 years, my great-grandkids will be able to listen to their great-grandpa. Unless the sun comes down and blows up the internet. Other than that, or if something else fucks up in this world. But if you want to have a hoot, when I decided to do this podcast, I called Jeff. I said, Jeff, I need you to come over. We do a podcast. He's like, what? I said, no, we're just going to start talking. I'm going to ask questions. And I will actually go back to that one sometimes on a road trip and listen to that podcast. So just go to Libsyn, Libsyn, and type in Hunting Dog Podcast. You'll see all the episodes. Or you could probably just type in Hunting Dog Podcast, Libsyn, Jeff Peterman. Anyway, Jeff was the first guy I went grouse hunting with. He had a dog named Winger. And Winger was a German Shorthair that he got out by, I think it was out by Ravenna, Michigan. And the guy had a plywood sign up that said AKC German Shorthair Pointers. That was all Jeff needed. Jeff was a bit of a houndsman as a teenager, but he had this short hair that was pretty good. Didn't like to get his feet wet. He would hold a point longer than he would. He would hold a point better than he would retrieve. But he was a good dog, and my first hunting was in Michigan was with Jeff Peterman. In fact, Jeff and I go duck hunting still once a year in October to his son's in-laws' place, a little pond, and we shoot a few wood ducks, and we have a barbecue, and we always catch up. We don't hunt anymore together, but with hunting friends, it really doesn't matter. When you see them, it's like you hunted yesterday. I do remember one thing he asked me though. When I met him, I was working at Shaw Walker in Muskegon, and somebody had told me on my crew that knew his crew. They knew I liked to bird hunt, even though it was just stories from Illinois. And then they introduced Jeff and I at lunch one day, and we started yapping away, and he invited me to go pat hunting. Well, in Michigan and a lot of spots in this country, we call grouse pats for partridge. He says, yeah, you want to go pat hunting tomorrow? I'm like, yeah. What is that? He goes, partridge, rough grouse. I'm like, oh, yeah. I've only pheasant hunted in Illinois. I don't. He says, all right, meet me at the Wesco gas station at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'm like, okay. He says, you got hip boots? I said, yeah. I didn't have any hip boots. I mean, I told him later on that I said, I thought you meant like hips, like hipster, like cool, like do you have some cool boots? But I did not even know when I moved to Michigan the difference between waders and hip boots. It just didn't come up in Illinois. Anyway, I went hunting with him and Wally my first day of grouse hunting along Cedar Creek in Muskegon County. And every time we crossed this serpentining river, creek, which was probably every 15 to 20 minutes trying to follow the dogs, or his dog, Wally and Jeff would have to fireman carry me over the creek because I didn't have hip boots. Okay? I didn't have hip boots. All right, so next time I do this, I'm going to start off with my first bird hunt in South Dakota. No, actually, I'm not going to do this. You know what I'm going to do? If you enjoyed this episode, which I hope you did, it was fun doing it, kind of a memory lane thing. And I always like these because most of the episodes, like, I got 6 grandkids right now. I could die tomorrow. I might die in 20 years and a couple of them hunt with me. But there's no guarantee in that. But there'll be some episodes here that I would have paid to hear about my grandpa, let alone my dad. But I can still remember my dad talking. I can still remember my dad playing cards with the guys and family picnics and family ball games. So I can still remember him. Can't remember my grandpas for nothing. I know what they look like from pictures. And the reason I do these, especially some of these episodes, they're a little self-serving. My grandkids, whether it's Lawson or Ronnie or Lincoln or Mara or Maeve or Parker, one of them might be interested in family history. God forbid they're interested in bird dogs, because then I would have to be reincarnated and come down and help them. But who knows? One of them might just find some real good value in listening to their grandpa just rattle on. Because we all remember, I shouldn't say we, most of us remember a grandparent and how we kind of idolized them and how we kind of listened to them. We listen to them better than we listen to our own parents sometimes. And that's why I love doing these stories. That's why I love, whether the podcast world goes away or my subscribers go away, which I don't see that happening. Everything's fine in that world. But that these stories remain out there selfishly for my relatives, for my offspring. Anyway, so I'm going to pick this back up on Patreon. Now, if you don't know what that is, or you've heard me, if you've been listening for a long time, it's like, Ron, I'm not giving you $5 a month to listen to a free show. I don't blame you. That's your right. That's your privilege. You don't need to do it. But hundreds of you do sign up for Patreon, and they get extra content. Well, one of the things I've been doing on Patreon for the last year is I've been doing the history of my dogs. And these are kind of unedited, unfiltered. I'm not trying to say titillating because I used the F-bomb. But I tell you some deep stuff, kind of like these stories I told you about my firsts. But I tell it to you only to the patrons. They don't get released as a podcast. They're about 30 to 40 minutes long. And as a patron, you can go back in the backlog. You can listen to all of them. And I'm going to pick up my next one, not with my first bird dog, because we've already been through that, but I'll jump in with my first out-of-state bird hunt in South Dakota with Jeff and Jerry and Bruce. I'm going to intermix that into my Patreon account for my patrons so they can get that one in. And I'm going to have Jeff come over and try to get Bruce to come over and do it. Jerry's dead, so he ain't coming over. But if I can get Bruce and Jeff to come over, we're going to recap that hunt from 35, whatever years ago it was, just for fun, have some beer, and do those podcasts that your relatives, if nothing else, want to listen to. And that's going to be on the podcast, but that's what you get more of on Patreon. Stories about the history of my dogs. I think I just got into the Bracco world from all the other dogs and the dog fights and the dog deaths and the dog fights and the dog murder scenes from cats. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. We'll have a real guest on. It won't be me next week. And have a great one. Spring is here. Get the dogs out. Our training season starts in about 2 weeks. We'll start to get together on Wednesdays, and there's no excuse not to get out there. I got a little lazy. My wife wanted an ATV to kind of cut some trails through the woods after we did the logging project, and I was all for it. Now, we got an old Kawasaki Mule that's 25 years old. Still works for doing yard chores. But she wanted an ATV to take the grandkids out sometimes. So we found a little Kawasaki 300, and I'm going to get that rigged up with a roading harness because, everybody knows I don't like to walk like I used to. But sure enough, I need to get these dogs some exercise. So I'm going to be doing a lot of roading with my dogs. Anyway, love you guys, love you girls. I love you patrons more. See you next week.